All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. So, we're going to do our last John Donne piece today. Now, this one isn't a poem, it's a meditation. Now, we know meditation means to sit quietly, have inner thoughts, think about something, usually something important, right? And this meditation, meditation 17, is, well, it starts out being about death, but it really turns into thinking about community. And you'll see when we get there. Okay? It begins with a Latin inscription, but below it, it has the English translation. Forgive my Latin, it is not good. Nunc lentu sonitu ducunt mories. And it means, now this bell, tolling softly for another, says to me, thou must die. Okay, now, I want you to remember, we've been talking about death bells since the beginning of the year, right? When they had death carts, they, bring out your dead. From The Pardoner's Tale, there was a bell ringing when the guy died. So we've been talking about this. So churches would ring bells when someone was either, dead for like a funeral, or someone who was dying, especially if someone important was dying, they would ring their bells. So here's John Donne. This is much later in his life. He's been ill. He's had a long illness. Some of us can really relate to that. And he's laying in his bed, and he hears church bells ringing. And he's thinking through. Perchance he for whom this bell tolls may be so ill, as that he knows not it tolls for him. And perchance I may think myself so much better than I am, as that they who are about me and see my state may have caused it to toll for me, and I know not that. Okay, so the first thing he's thinking is, maybe the person that bell is ringing for doesn't know they're dying because they're so sick. And maybe I'm the person who's so sick that I don't know I'm dying, and that bell is for me. All right, we're already getting in deep, right? The church is Catholic, universal. You'll notice that's a low C Catholic. So Catholic means universal. So he's talking here about the Church of England, and that basically everybody in England is a member of the Church of England, right? And he kind of expands that out to everybody in the world is a member of the church. The church is Catholic, universal. So are all her actions. So we get personification, right? All that she does belongs to all. When she baptizes a child, that action concerns me, for that child is hereby connected to that head, which is my head too, and engrafted into that body, whereof I am a member. Right? So it's like the body of Christ, right, is the church. And when a child is baptized and brought into the church, that affects every member of the church, right? Because we're all connected. And when she buries a man, so when the church buries a person, that action concerns me. All mankind is of one author and is one volume. When one man dies, one chapter is not torn out of the book, but translated into a better language. And each chapter must be so translated. So we're moving from the conceit or metaphor of the church as a body to the idea of the church as a library. And everybody who is in the world is a chapter in the same book. We're all humans together. And when a person dies, they don't tear the chapter out of the book. It just gets translated into a better language. In other words, they go to heaven. God employs several translators. Some pieces are translated by age, some by sickness, some by war, some by justice. But God's hand is in every translation, and his hand shall bind up all our scattered leaves again. For that library where every book shall lie open to one another, as therefore the bell that rings to a sermon calls not upon the preacher only, but upon the congregation to come. So this bell calls us all, but how much more me, who am brought so near the door by this sickness? Okay, there's a lot of ideas in there. He's finishing up the idea of the translation, that God translates everybody's life, right? And the way that you are changed might be through war, might be through illness, might be through justice, but everybody dies. Everybody's translated, okay? And God is going to gather up everybody's pages and put us all in this great library, which is heaven, and we're all going to be together. And then he says, the bell is calling me to pay attention. Just like when the bell rings to start church, right? The bell doesn't call the preacher to church. The preacher's already there. It calls everybody else, right? So he's taking that idea like this bell isn't calling the dead person or the dying person. It's calling everybody else to pay attention to what's going on. It's calling everybody else to think about their lives. And then he says, but I'm really being called because I've been so sick that I really am paying attention now. Okay? So now we're going to go into our second paragraph. There was a contention, as far as a suit, in which piety and dignity, religion and estimation were mingled. A suit here is like a legal lawsuit. So there was an argument which got as far as a legal lawsuit of which of the religious orders should ring to prayers first in the morning. And it was determined that they should ring first that rose earliest. Okay, so the decision in this court case was, the churches were arguing over, well, there's a lot of churches, who gets to ring their bells first in the morning? And the judgment was whoever gets up first. Get out of my courtroom, basically. And so he's then taking that idea and going a little further with it. He says, if we understand aright the dignity of this bell that tolls for our evening prayer, we should be glad to make it ours by rising early in that application, that it might be ours as well as his whose indeed it is. Okay, so if we understand the importance of ringing a bell, not just because you're ringing a bell, but because you're calling other people to worship and you're making other people think about their lives and think about God, right? They hear the bell and they think about it. That's really important, and we should be willing to sacrifice for helping other people think about God and think about holiness. And the his it is kind of complex. It's definitely the bell for, say, the person who's ill, but it's also the bell for God. Like, it ultimately makes you think about God. Okay. The bell doth toll for him that thinks it doth. And though it intermit again, yet from that minute that occasion wrought upon him, he is united to God. So if you think the bell is for you, it is. Because in that moment that you're thinking about it and you're thinking about God and you're thinking about your faith, that's the moment that you're being united to God. So the bell is for you. And now he's going to use some more conceits here, trying to help us understand. Who casts not up his eye to the sun when it rises, but who takes off his eye from a comet when that breaks out? So when the sun comes up, everybody looks at the sunrise, right? If a comet's going across the sky, everybody watches it. Who bends not his ear to any bell, which upon any occasion rings? Right? Anytime a bell rings, we pay attention to it. Think about when your phone goes off, right? Or somebody else's phone goes off. You instantly look up, oh, what is it? What notification is that? What's going on? Right? We don't ignore it. You pay attention to it. And this is the same thing. Like anytime that bell rings, we're paying attention. But who can remove it from that bell, which is passing a piece of himself out of this world? Okay, so even more than just paying attention to it, that funeral bell means someone is dying. And since we're all connected, right? We all belong to the same humanity and the same faith, and we all are created to, as the same people. When someone's leaving the world, that matters to us. We're losing a part of ourselves, and we should pay attention. Okay, now comes the most famous part of this writing. And this is where it ties into your extra credit with the Simon and Garfunkel song. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor of thy friends or of thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never sent to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. Okay, so there's two really good concepts in there, right? That no person is completely by themselves. No person is completely alone. Every person is a part of humanity, and humanity is interconnected. And when we lose one piece of our interconnected selves, just like if one bit of dirt comes off of the whole continent of Europe, that continent is less. Just like if a whole mountain fell into the sea, or if, if your house or my house or someone you knew's house blew down, right? Just like if a grain of sand got washed away. They're equally as important, whether we know these people or not, whether we have a personal stake in it or not. Everyone is an important part, an essential part of humanity. That is a deeply comforting and deeply important idea, that we are connected to each other, right? And if it sounds a little bit like the circle of life, you're not that wrong, right? We're all connected to each other in the circle that never ends. So he's using the metaphor or the conceit of the continent and the land to talk about humanity and how we're all connected and we're all important. And therefore he ends like, don't ask for who that bell is for. It's for you. Not only because you should be paying attention, but because if someone's dying and leaving the world, that matters to you personally, because you are connected to them, because you are also human. And you are part of this interconnected faith that we call humanity. Okay, and now he's going to explain a little bit about why it matters to you and how we can learn from other people. Okay. Neither can we call this a begging of misery or a borrowing of misery, as though we were not miserable enough of ourselves, but must fetch in more from the next house, in taking upon us the misery of our neighbors. So he says, we're not borrowing trouble. We're not saying, okay, he's dying and he's sick, and I'm going to make it about me. What he's saying is, I need to think about what he's going through. And he's going to get into more detail here. Like, I'm not making his death about me. I'm connecting with him who's dying as a human person and as part of the human family. Truly, it were an excusable covetousness if we did, for affliction is a treasure, and scarcely any man hath enough of it. Okay, that's a weird concept, right? That's a paradox, that affliction is a treasure. Affliction is like suffering. How can suffering be a treasure? Why could we not have enough suffering? There's a lot of suffering in our world, right? Let's look at his explanation. No man hath affliction enough that is not matured and ripened by it, and made fit for God by that affliction. So the suffering isn't the point. The fact that when we go through suffering, we become stronger, better, more holy, more connected to other people, more compassionate, right? We grow deeper in our faith. Those are the reasons that suffering is good. And now he's going to use another conceit, and he's going to compare suffering to treasure. If a man carry treasure in bullion or in a wedge of gold, so if you had a chunk of gold or a bunch of gold coins, right, and have none coined into the current monies, his treasure will not defray him as he travels. Okay, so if you have this big chunk of gold, right, but you don't actually have any cash, you can't pay for anything. That's not helpful, right? You can't like go to McDonald's and hand them a chunk of gold. They're not interested. Tribulation is treasure in the nature of it, but it is not current money in the use of it, except we get nearer and nearer our home heaven by it. Okay, so unless we use our trouble and our suffering in the world to become better people and basically like turn that suffering into something useful, it doesn't do us any good. But if we let it refine us, refine, there's a money word, right? A gold word. If we let it make us better people, then that suffering has been worth it in his mind. Another may be sick, too, and sick to death, and this affliction may lie in his bowels as gold in a mine and be of no use to him. Okay, so he's imagining a person who's so sick they're dying, right? And they're going through a lot of suffering. But the suffering isn't making them better people. It's not improving them. It's not making them more compassionate. They're just having suffering. They're not doing anything with it, okay? And so they have the suffering, but it's not any use to them. But this bell that tells me of his affliction digs out and applies that gold to me. If, by this consideration of another's danger, I take my own into contemplation and so secure myself by making my recourse to my God, who is our only security. So if the bell rings for that guy who's dying and suffering but isn't being improved by it in any way, but I hear that bell and I think about my own mortality and I think about how I can be a better person and I think about my faith and it brings me closer, then that suffering actually has been a treasure, but it's been a treasure to me. It's an interesting perspective, isn't it? And you don't have to agree with him. That's the nice thing about a meditation. Like he's thinking about ideas and he's kind of letting his brain drift in lots of different ways. And some of it you can really agree with and really understand. And other parts of it you could be like, I don't think so, dude. And that's the beautiful thing about this. Like your emotional resonance brings everything that you think and feel to his writing. So you're going to go into Schoology. You've got a discussion question. And I'm interested to hear what you think. And have a wonderful spring break. Bye, everybody.